Today, we're going to look at the downfall of the world's most powerful man, who ironically had no power over himself. This man was King Ahasuerus, who was also known as Xerxes. And in this episode of the Following Jesus podcast, we'll look at 5 mistakes that he makes and how we can avoid those things in our own lives. Hi, my name is David Cipriano. I'm a youth pastor, and my goal is to teach the Bible to as many people as possible. So in the last episode, we saw that God is never mentioned in the book of Esther. But even though God is never mentioned anywhere, he is evidenced everywhere. You can't see his name, but you can find his work. Esther is a story of God's providence and how God directs everything to accomplish his ultimate purpose. Last episode was an introduction, and this week we're getting into the story starting with the first chapter. The first verse says, "Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia, over 127 provinces." So this story starts off in chapter 1 with a man named Ahasuerus. Now in secular history records, he's usually referred to as Xerxes. Throughout this study, I'm going to usually call him Ahasuerus, just because that's what the Bible calls him. So Ahasuerus was the king of an incredibly large kingdom. Now, as we think about the dominating kingdoms of world history, there was Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, also known as Medo-Persia, where Ahasuerus reigned. There was Greece, there was the Roman Empire. And at the time of the story of Esther, Ahasuerus is the king of the most powerful country in the world. Persia was the world's largest and most dominant empire. See, externally, he has everything. He's rich, he's well-liked and popular, people do what he tells them to do. Anything he wants, he can easily have. He's living the dream. And as a Medo-Persian king, he has a title, which was the King of Kings. And maybe this reminds you of God's title and how God is also referred to as the King of Kings. See, in a sense, Ahasuerus was on top of the world. Externally, he's very wealthy, but internally, he was very poor. We're going to see throughout this study that Ahasuerus has control over the world, but no control over his own life. This was a man who was egotistical and vain. He has a failing marriage, which was his fault. He was a really bad decision maker. He was extremely dependent on his men. See, chapter 1 shows us the fall of a king, and he's still king, but he falls from grace. At the beginning of the chapter, he's showing off his wealth and his power for the whole world to see, but then at the end of the chapter, he's humiliated. He's angry, he's going to banish his queen, and after this chapter, things are going to get even worse. So today, we're going to see 5 reasons why the king fell. Now, these are important to us because these 5 things will cause us to stumble as well. See, the problems of the rich and the powerful are often the same problems that everybody else has. So here is 5 faults of King Ahasuerus. Number 1, we see his pride. Here's what the Bible describes, that in those days when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So when Ahasuerus was in the 3rd year of his reign, he holds a feast for 180 days. This feast goes on for half a year. It was a party that seemingly never ended, and this was much more of a get-together or a hangout. This wasn't about having fun or seeing his friends. It was all about showing off. See, he wanted to show the world, look what I can afford. Look at how much money I have. Look at how majestic our capital is. See, people people often like to show off just to impress people, but you know when you do that, you're really just impressing the wrong people. If someone's only interested in you because of your money, that's exactly the person that you should be avoiding. Ahasuerus has this extreme display of wealth, and when the 6 months of this feast were over, he then holds another feast that lasts another 7 days. So as if he hasn't partied enough, after these 6 months, he holds another week of feasting. See, the first 6 months had the princes and the nobles and the servants, and then the next week it involved everybody. Everybody in the capital city, small and great. So first, he shows off to the ones in power, and then he shows off to everybody. You know, the Bible says a lot of destructive things about pride, which is exactly what Ahasuerus is displaying here. Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall." Pride is destructive, and not pride in the sense of I'm proud of what I've accomplished, but pride that says, look at me, I'm better than everyone else. It's taking credit that should have belonged to God. See, this pride that Ahasuerus shows is really an arrogance. It's a cockiness. It's saying, look at what I did instead of look at what God did. The first step in Ahasuerus' downfall is pride. And we see in the middle of his pride the second mistake, which is his drunkenness. The Bible describes it in verses 7 and 8. "And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance according to the state of the king, and the drinking was according to the law, none did compel. For so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house, that they should do according to every man's pleasure." So people could drink all that they wanted, and the people who were serving the drinks had this rule among them that they could not tell anybody, no, every man according to his pleasure. Now, this is not a popular message today, even among Christians, but drunkenness is a sin. And at Ahasuerus' party, it's not just that they were having a little bit of wine, but they were very drunk. All you could drink, every man according to his pleasure, and in their drunkenness, they were acting foolishly, acting in a way that no person should ever act. You see, one of the reasons why alcohol is so dangerous is that it makes you lose control. It brings out the worst in you. Ephesians 5:18 tells us, "Be not drunk with wine, wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit." To be drunk is to be controlled. And it's a really dangerous thing to let alcohol be in control of you. This is one of the reasons why drunk driving is so dangerous, because a person can't fully control their motions. The alcohol is controlling them instead of them controlling them. And Proverbs 20 gives this warning, "Wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise." Don't be deceived by alcohol. Now, if you ever watch a beer commercial, which are some of the most common commercials today, you'll notice something is that these beer commercials never show a drunk person. They don't show the dangers of a drunk person getting behind the wheel. They don't show how alcohol brings out the worst in people. They don't show you the real life of an alcoholic. No, the commercial wants you to only see the fun parts. They want to show you having a good time with your friends. They want to show people having a party and laughing and getting together and having fun. Beer commercials only show one side of the story. And the Bible tells us to not be deceived by wine. Don't be tricked into alcoholism. And Proverbs 23 says, "Be not among winebibbers, for the drunkard shall come to poverty." So on one hand, don't be an alcoholic or a drunk yourself, and on the other hand, don't hang out with those who are. Even if you're not drinking and getting drunk yourself, that's a bad environment to be in. See, it's better to stay away from temptation rather than to try to say no when the temptation comes. Some people don't drink, but they might go to the bar with their friends who do, and they decide to not drink there. And I think that it's good to decide to not drink, but it's even better to say, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to hang out with the friends who are getting drunk and doing foolish things. I'm going to stay away from from that. Galatians 5:21 tells us that drunkenness is a work of the flesh, as opposed to being a fruit of the Spirit. See, drunkenness represents the old man and our sinful nature, but on the contrary, temperance represents the new man. See, time after time, the Bible warns about the dangers of alcohol. At this great feast, King Ahasuerus and all the other people are getting drunk, and in their drunkenness are acting very foolishly. For Ahasuerus, drunkenness brings out the worst in him. It does not make him a better person. And we see that displayed in this next mistake that he makes, which is his objectification. So while the king is putting on this display, he's showing off, he's being prideful, he's getting drunk with his friends, he disrespects and objectifies his wife, Queen Vashti. It says here in verses 10 through 12 that on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Now remember that the king's feast was all about displaying his power and his wealth. He loved to show off, and now he treats his wife, the queen, the same way, as if she was nothing more than a possession or something to brag about, or an object. This was not just an admiration of her beauty, it was putting her on display. He wasn't really treating her like his wife, he was treating her like an object to show off in front of all the guys. And this isn't really spelled out in the Bible, but I think that it can be safely assumed that this wasn't just to walk out for everybody to admire. This was to expose herself like she was at some club. Now when it comes to objectification, we all realize that it's not wrong to think that somebody is beautiful or attractive or to be drawn to somebody, but it becomes wrong when it's degrading, when it's treating them like an object or a thing. Remember that people are more than physical. We all have feelings and emotions and a soul, but Ahasuerus has ignored that fact. He's objectifying her. He's disrespecting his wife in front of all the people. See, objectification was also one of the sins that David committed with Bathsheba. When David saw her, he decided to entertain lustful thoughts. And when he entertains those wrong thoughts, he sends other people to go get her for him. And someone says to him, "Is not this Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" But you know what David does? He ignores them because he wasn't really seeing her as a person or as somebody's wife or as somebody that mattered. He only wanted to use her to get what he wanted. He was objectifying her. I find it interesting that David defeated Goliath but was defeated by lust. Lust is a powerful and destructive thing. Lust can be very addictive. And the way that King David treats Bathsheba, King Ahasuerus treats Vashti, with objectification and disrespect. So what are Ahasuerus' faults? Well, first there is pride and showing off. Next there was drunkenness and foolishness, letting the alcohol control him. Third, there was objectification. Number 4, we see anger. In verse 12 it says, "But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him." Ahasuerus says, "Do this," but Vashti says no. And I think that this is a good reminder to everybody that you don't have to do everything that a guy or a girl wants you to do. Whether it's inappropriate pictures or having sex before marriage, it's good and it's right to say no to certain things. But when Vashti tells the king no, there's a conflict, because the king doesn't take no for an answer. Because remember, he doesn't respect her, he doesn't care about her desires. So when Queen Vashti refused to come out so that all the men could look at her, the Bible says, therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. So why was the king so angry? Why was he so mad? Well, it's because her opinion doesn't really matter to him. His life was all about him. Now, in a healthy relationship, both people's opinions matter equally, but for King Ahasuerus, his opinion was the only one that mattered. He was used to making life all about himself. He was a self-absorbed man. Look at my power, look at my wealth, look at my kingdom, look at my wife. Everything's about him. So when she tells him no, he becomes an angry man. And here's what Proverbs 16:32 has to say about anger. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city. And I think that this verse so perfectly describes Ahasuerus, because he was a very powerful man as far as military and government and politics, but he has no control over his life. See, there's an irony in his life, because on one hand, he's the most powerful man in the world, politically speaking, but on the other hand, he's powerless. He's out of control. He's angry, he's throwing a temper tantrum because he didn't get his way. He controls others, but he can't control himself. And here's what he does in his anger. Mistake number 5, there's his decision. So the king goes to his closest advisors and he says, what shall we do unto the Queen Vashti according to law, because she hath not performed the commandment of the King Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? So we see here that he's turning his personal relationship into a public problem, and it's a shame when people are always trashing the person that they're with in front of others. Now, do you always need to pretend like the person that you're with is perfect? Well, no, of course not. But there also needs to be some respect and some privacy, because this should have been between the king and the queen, but he makes it between him and all of his friends against her. He's not even handling this by himself, because he goes to his advisors and he says, what shall we do? And one of his advisors named Memucan says, she hasn't just wronged you, but all of us. Memucan found a way to make this all about him. See, it's no surprise here that the selfish king surrounded himself with other selfish people. And here's what verses 17 and 18 say. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes, when it shall be reported, the king Ahasuerus committed Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes which have heard of the deed of the queen, thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. So these men determine that when word gets out about what Vashti has done and telling the king no, that this might embolden all of the other wives in the kingdom to start telling their husbands no too. So they decide to make an example out of her and divorce her and to give away her estate and to banish her, so that none of the women in all the kingdom would start to get any ideas. Verse 22, for he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. So what we see here, this is not male headship, this was not God's design, this was not complementarianism, this is unhealthy control, this is domination, this is abusive. You see, the Bible teaches that the husband should be the head of the home, but sadly, some husbands will take it way too far, and they'll twist this doctrine, and they'll turn it into a situation where the wife doesn't really have a say, where her opinions of something don't really matter. And this is exactly what we see here. See, these men are treating their wives like they don't really matter, like they're possessions, like their opinion doesn't count, and this was not right. Because the husband is not not to be the dictator of the home. He's not supposed to be like a boss or just a master. No, he's to love, to lead, to sacrifice, to love his wife as Christ loves the church. But this king doesn't do anything like that. He decides to divorce her and to banish her. And notice here, he makes a permanent decision based on a temporary emotion. Now, we make some bad decisions when we let our emotions rule. The king was angry for a time because of something that his wife did, and he was wrong in that anger. But in his temporary emotions, he makes this permanent, unchangeable decision. And as we're going to see in chapter 2, the king will eventually regret it. And that's the danger of making quick, hasty decisions in your anger and in your emotions, that you'll do something permanently just because of a temporary feeling. So Esther chapter 1 is about the downfall of the king. And as we're going to learn next week, this was just the first domino that fell, because it's going to get even worse for Ahasuerus. Thanks for listening to this episode, and subscribe for more biblical teaching like this.